It seems that the more coercive a program is, the less functional it becomes. There are probably many good reasons for this to be true, and not all of them are obvious. But some of the best-sounding reasons give rise to the most contradictory of results. Take, for example, the phase treatment program, a 5-part therapy regimen designed ostensibly to provide the participant some strength where once weakness reigned. Because this treatment program is located within the confines of a high-security mental hospital, the administrators feel it necessary to impose property restrictions and to censor all movies. This seems perfectly reasonable at first, but if you begin to think about the results of such a system, you can quickly see that it must produce the opposite effect it is supposedly designed to create. With watchdogs approving or disapproving every purchase made or every television program watched, you might as well try learning to swim in a bathtub. Where and when does the person trapped in this arrangement have a chance to prove himself? Few ever get free of the system, since decisions about release are highly politically charged. The system that cannot trust its best efforts, like phase treatment, sends a clear message to the person who is force-fed treatment. That message is, we don't have any confidence in you or in our system either, but we'd sure like you to join up anyway. Remember the phrase, your system is perfectly designed to produce the results you are getting. Can anyone please point to a successful inpatient sex offender treatment program? They go back to the 30s. Many detainees appear not to have any disorders, sexual or otherwise. And as all mental health professionals know, absent current signs or symptoms, the diagnosis cannot be made. Of course, in a more open environment, without censorship, those captured wrongly by this law could easily be identified by their choices. That missing evidence would be apparent and documented. The absence of examples of signs and symptoms of a current mental disorder. But without choice, there can't be any determination as to whether or not an individual even has a mental disorder. Privately, psychologists acknowledge the truth. A person's history alone cannot be sufficient basis for a diagnosis. Even the so-called predator law requires more than mere history. The institution psychologists say truthfully that they cannot make actual diagnoses. That is a job reserved for psychiatrists alone at this institution. Psychiatrists are also required by the courts to be in attendance in the monthly wellness and recovery team meetings. Yet, because there are so few psychiatrists here, this does not happen. This practice is not accidental. It is engineered to conceal the very evidence which would expose the invalid nature of the diagnoses. Because if they did attend WRT meetings, they'd be hounded by the detainees for corrections to their diagnoses, such as the removal of false diagnoses or the addition of course specifiers. These course specifiers would alert whoever's reading the document that since there have been no signs or symptoms for quite some time, that the diagnosis is historical and not current. The Department of Justice is well aware of this and has instructed through the courts that the hosprison must begin providing clinical assessments immediately upon the admission of any individual. The APA Ethics Code instructs doctors that they must remain independent, especially from their employers like Coalinga and Atascadero State Hospitals. But when a doctor at Coalinga eliminates, reduces, or modifies a diagnosis, he or she is informed by Sacramento bureaucrats whether the diagnosis is acceptable or not. This is the same thing as practicing medicine without a license by remote control, telling doctors what diagnoses they can and cannot make. The hosprison system selects for compliance of psychiatrists, psychologists, and clinicians. Doctors, in turn, understand that if they want to be independent and work unfettered, they must go to work somewhere else. Some are understandably outraged. This workplace is hostile, poisonous, and incestuous. Many psychiatrists and psychologists start out loving the truth and hating hypocrisy and deception. They're motivated to seeking out and providing positive treatment outcomes for their patients. But by the time they spend a few years working for the Department of Mental Health, they often become cynical and jaded. Little by little, they are drawn into participation in this thinly disguised death camp. Some have become so polarized that they've become the toughest advocates of this lethal system. About half the time, they just leave. The rest, those doctors willing to put up with the assaults on their ethical independence, will remain. In this way are psychiatrists, psychologists, and clinicians selected for compliance with the hospital administration rather than with APA standards, which require independence from outside influence or interference.